Have you ever noticed what happens when you stop replying, not just to a text, but to a pattern, not just to a person, but to an expectation? The moment you withdraw without drama, without apology, the world shifts. People panic, not because they miss you, but because they've lost control. Your silence becomes a mirror, and suddenly they're forced to face something they were never prepared for: themselves. Most people don't fear your absence. They fear the power you reclaim when you stop giving them unrestricted access to your energy. This video isn't about ghosting. It's not about playing mind games or cutting people off. It's about something far deeper and far more dangerous. It's about boundaries, not the kind you post about on social media, not a sassy "I'm setting boundaries" flex, but real, sacred psychological boundaries, the kind Carl Jung called essential to individuation. We're going to explore how your constant availability is draining your life force. We'll dive into why saying no feels like guilt at first, but becomes liberation. And you'll discover the invisible war being fought over your attention, your emotions, and your psychic energy. By the end of this video, you won't just understand why everything changes when you become unavailable. You'll embody that change, because when you withdraw from the world, something begins to awaken inside you, and that is where your real power lives. You weren't born drained. You were trained to be. Trained to pick up the phone even when your soul is exhausted. Trained to say yes when your entire body screams no. Trained to be emotionally available on demand, like a vending machine for comfort, reassurance, and presence. And now, you wonder why you feel hollow. Because every time you abandon yourself to make someone else feel better, you cross a sacred line, one you can't see, but your psyche feels. This is where boundaries come in. Carl Jung spoke of the psyche as a living system, not a blank slate. And just like a cell in your body, your psyche needs a membrane, a boundary, to protect what is vital and reject what is toxic. But most of us walk through life with boundaries so porous they may as well not exist. We let anyone step into our emotional space. We share our energy like it's infinite. We give pieces of ourselves away in every interaction and call it kindness. But it's not kindness if it costs you your peace. It's not generosity if it leaves you resentful. That's not love, that's self-erasure. There are three kinds of boundaries. Porous, you let everything in. Overshare, overcommit, overextend. Rigid, you let nothing in. Isolate, avoid, hide. And then there's the third path, healthy boundaries. Selective, intentional, sovereign. You've been taught that availability equals virtue, but availability without discernment is how you get used and forgotten, like a faucet that never turns off. Eventually, no one notices the water, they just expect it. And here's the dark truth: the more available you are, the less people value you, because what is always accessible becomes invisible, predictable, replaceable. Though you stay in the loop, you respond, you react, you explain, you become the emotional emergency button everyone presses to escape their own discomfort. But every time you do that, you leak energy, psychic energy. Jung believed that psychic energy is like a battery. Every thought, every emotional reaction, every unspoken frustration drains it. And unless you create a boundary to contain it, the world will consume you, silently, completely. So ask yourself, who have you given access to that hasn't earned it? Where have you said yes when silence would have been your salvation? And most importantly, how much of your exhaustion is not from what you're doing, but from what you're allowing? Because you don't need more rest. You need fewer leaks, and those leaks begin at the point where you fail to say, "This is where I end." And that is where you begin. If this message is helping you reconnect with parts of yourself you've long ignored, subscribe to the channel. This space is made for people like you. Most people think power comes from action, from speaking louder, standing taller, fighting harder. But Jung knew a deeper truth. Real power begins the moment you create space. not space around you, but space within you. He called it the temenos. In ancient Greek, temenos meant a sacred enclosure, a place marked off from the ordinary world, a temple, a sanctuary, a threshold. Not everyone could enter, and not everything was welcome. Jung borrowed this image to describe the psyche. He believed that for real psychological transformation to occur, you must first draw a boundary, not around your physical body, but around your being. Your temenos is where the real work begins. It's not your bedroom, not your therapist's couch, not the yoga retreat you can barely afford. It's the inner space you guard with absolute clarity. No projections, no guilt, no expectations from others. Just you and the raw, uncomfortable, sacred material of your unconscious. This isn't about disappearing, it's about protecting the alchemy, because transformation does not happen in chaos, it happens in containment. Think of fire. When it burns without boundaries, it destroys, but placed inside a hearth, a defined space, it warms, it illuminates, it sustains life. Your emotional energy works the same way. Uncontained, it reacts and scorches everything in its path. But when you hold it in a temenos, it becomes fuel for integration, for individuation, for becoming. So when you stop responding to everything, when you stop apologizing for needing silence, when you stop being a 24-hour emotional resource for people who never ask how you're doing, you are not withdrawing from the world. You are consecrating your energy. You are saying, this part of me is not for public access. And for those who believe your soul was theirs to access on demand, that realization will feel like betrayal, but that's where individuation begins. Jung taught that each of us wears a persona, a mask shaped by society, family, trauma, and the need to survive. You perform as the responsible one, the agreeable one, the available one. You shrink and stretch to fit expectations, believing that this is connection. But your temenos is not interested in roles. It's where the mask dissolves. It's where you stop being who they need you to be and start becoming who you are. In this process, it's not loud. It's not performative. It doesn't need applause. It is silent, solitary, sacred. That's why setting boundaries feels like grief, because you are not just changing how others treat you. You are mourning every version of yourself that existed only to please. You're tearing down an identity you built just to survive. But every time you say no from a grounded place, not from anger, but from self-respect, you are laying a stone in the foundation of your inner temple. Every time you choose stillness over reactivity, you clear a space for your authentic self to emerge. And when someone asks why you've changed, why you've become distant, why you no longer explain yourself, you owe them nothing, because this evolution is not for them to approve, it is for you to live. Inside your temenos, you do not perform, you do not prove, you listen to the parts of yourself you've silenced, to the anger you've mistaken for pettiness, to the exhaustion you've mislabeled as laziness, to the voice that whispers, I am not here to be consumed, and for the first time, you hear it. This is the paradox of becoming unavailable. On the outside, it looks like distance, but on the inside, you are finally returning to yourself. You've been taught that silence means weakness, that if you don't explain yourself, you'll be misunderstood, that if you don't respond, you'll be abandoned. But Jung didn't see silence as absence, he saw it as amplified presence. Because silence, when it comes from awareness, is not retreat, it's revelation. It disrupts the emotional circuitry others rely on to keep you predictable, pliable, and available. You think you're in control because you're choosing your words. But in truth, you're still reacting, and as long as you're reacting, you're being directed. People don't need to yell to manipulate you, they just need to find your emotional trigger and press it again and again until you explode, until you cry, until you explain, until you give them the energy they came to take. But what happens when you no longer react? What happens when they press the button and nothing happens? Silence. And in that silence, the entire dynamic crumbles. Because now, the mask they put on you, the role of the helper, the forgiver, the bigger person, begins to fall apart. They can no longer use your empathy to avoid their own discomfort. They can no longer bait you into being the one who smooths things over. You are no longer performing. You are no longer providing. You are no longer playing their emotional instrument. You've gone off script. And for those who only knew how to interact with the version of you that apologized for everything, the version that couldn't stand being misunderstood, this is psychological chaos, because your unavailability becomes a mirror, and that mirror reflects back the parts of them they never wanted to see. Jung called this the shadow, the rejected, unacknowledged aspects of ourselves that we project onto others. We assign the blame. We say you're selfish, you're distant, you've changed. But what's really happening is that you've stopped playing the role that kept their shadow hidden. Now they're exposed. Your silence becomes a revelation they didn't consent to. And that's when the accusations start. You're acting different. You're being cold. You think you're better than us. But this isn't about you changing. It's about you no longer being functional for someone else's emotional economy. They don't miss you. They miss the version of you that kept them from facing themselves. And here's the harsh truth. Most people don't want connection. They want compliance. They want your energy, not your essence. But when you stop explaining yourself, when you stop justifying your limits, you remove their ability to write the story for you. You are no longer the character in their script. You are your own narrator. And that, for many, is unforgivable. Because now the narrative unravels, the one where you're always the understanding one, always the available one, always the one who makes room, who softens, who bends. Now you are still. Now you say no without raising your voice. Now you let people feel the weight of their own actions without rushing in to rescue them from their discomfort. And that silence? It hits harder than any speech you could give. Because they're no longer reacting to your words, they're reacting to the void you've left behind. A void where your energy used to be. That space isn't empty, it's sacred. It's the boundary you've built, not to punish, but to protect. Not to isolate, but to integrate. Not to shut people out, but to finally let yourself in. And once you've tasted that kind of sovereignty, you'll never be available in the same way again. If this is resonating, if you're starting to feel that subtle shift inside you, don't just watch from the sideline. Subscribe to the channel. Join a space where your evolution isn't just welcome, it's protected. Let's be honest. Becoming unavailable isn't all power and peace. At first, it's pain. Not the obvious kind, not a clean break. It's a slow ache, like pulling yourself out of a role you've rehearsed your whole life. Because the first thing you feel is guilt. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you finally stopped doing something that was wrong for you. You decline a call, and your chest tightens. You say no to a favor, and your stomach knots. You ignore a message that demands your emotional labor, and a whisper inside says you're being selfish. But that voice isn't your truth. It's your training. You were conditioned to believe that love means self-sacrifice, that peace means people-pleasing, that safety means silence. So when you finally draw a line, your nervous system sounds the alarm, not because you're in danger, but because for the first time you're safe, and safety feels unfamiliar, especially when the backlash comes, because it will. When you stop being useful, people will accuse you of betrayal, not because you've changed, but because you're no longer bending into a shape that fits their needs. You'll hear things like, "You used to be so kind. I don't recognize you anymore. You've really distanced yourself." But kindness without boundaries isn't kindness, it's currency. And if your connection falls apart the moment you stop paying, it was never connection to begin with. This is where it gets lonely. Not everyone will come with you. Not everyone will respect your new perimeter. Some will leave, others will try to breach it, and a few will test you just to see if you'll fold. And maybe, for a moment, you'll want to explain, to soften, to make it easier for them. But don't, because the people who truly see you don't need explanations. They don't demand access. They respect distance. They understand that love without freedom is just emotional captivity. And here's the paradox. The more unavailable you become to what drains you, the more available you become to what restores you. Because your peace is no longer a performance. Your silence is no longer a punishment. It's a homecoming. You'll notice it in quiet moments. Your breath deepens. Your mind calms. The constant buzzing of anxiety, guilt, overthinking begins to fade. And in that stillness, something returns. You. Not the persona, not the mask, not the hyper-appable version of you that was never truly whole, but the you that remembers how to say no without shame. The you that protects energy like it's sacred. The you that knows being misunderstood is survivable. Being disrespected is correctable, but being emotionally consumed is a death by 1,000 cuts. So when the world tells you to be more, give more, explain more, respond with less noise, less access, less compromise. And in that subtraction, you will find something rare, clarity. You are not for everyone. You were never supposed to be. Let that truth burn away the guilt. Let it cleanse the illusion that your worth depends on your availability. And if you've made it this far, you're not falling apart. You're breaking script, and the next scene will be entirely your own. There comes a moment in the silence, after the guilt has passed, after the reactions have died down, where you realize something strange. You no longer need to be needed. That alone is rebirth. Because until now, your identity was reaction. You answered, you explained, you adjusted, you were shaped by the people and patterns around you like soft clay molded by other hands. But now, you're still, but not passive, quiet, but not empty. For the first time, you're not reacting, you're choosing. Jung believed the ultimate goal of the human psyche wasn't happiness or harmony, but individuation, becoming who you truly are, apart from the expectations of the collective. And individuation doesn't begin when you find yourself. It begins when you stop performing, when you break the automatic cycle of reaction and reclaim the space between stimulus and response. That's the space where you stop being a puppet, where you sever the strings. Before this, you were a responder, a reflection, a mirror of others' needs. But now, you are something else entirely. Now, you are a creator. You create the terms, the timing, the tone. You create the frame, who gets in, who stays out, and what version of you shows up, if any at all. You no longer offer explanations for your boundaries, because you understand that your energy is not a community resource, it's sacred capital. And every choice you make from this place of stillness builds a world around you that reflects your truth, not your conditioning. This is the shift no one talks about, not just emotional recovery, but psychological authorship. You stop being the page others write their chaos on, and instead you hold the pen, and in that sovereignty, a different kind of power begins to take root. Not the power of control, but of direction. Not domination, but discernment. Now you can say no without urgency. You can walk away without flinching. You can disappoint people you love without betraying yourself. You've grieved the old version of you that made themselves small to keep others comfortable. You've survived their withdrawal, their silence, their discomfort with your boundaries. And on the other side of all of that is you. The real you. The one that doesn't rely on validation to feel valuable. The one that doesn't need to be understood to be whole. The one that doesn't panic in solitude but finds shelter in it. And from this inner clarity, something new begins to emerge. Direction. No longer spinning in someone else's storm. No longer playing the diplomat in your own emotional war. You move with intention, not reaction. You speak with purpose, not apology. You choose your battles, your people, your priorities, not to control, but to protect the world you're building. And the world will notice. Some will call you cold, others will say you've changed. A few will even admire you, though they'll never say it out loud. But none of that matters now, because you're no longer waiting for permission to exist as you are. You've become unavailable, not to punish, not to escape, but to finally stand where you've always belonged, in your own presence, in your own timing, in your own life. And the version of you that rises from this silence is not someone new. It's the one you buried beneath your availability. And now that they've returned, steady, sovereign, and whole, you won't trade that presence for anyone's comfort again. There's a silence that follows transformation, not the silence of retreat, but the silence that comes after rebirth. When you've pulled your energy back from every leaking hole, every false obligation, every space where you once danced to be accepted. What's left isn't emptiness, it's stillness. But that stillness can be haunting, because you will lose people. You will be called selfish, cold, distant, and for a while you might wonder if they're right. You'll sit alone some nights and question if it was worth it. If choosing yourself meant abandoning everyone else. If freedom was just a more elegant kind of loneliness. And here's the truth. In the beginning, it is. Because you've left the collective script. You've stepped outside the role they loved you for. You've stopped being available in ways they never had to earn. And now the echo of your absence rings louder than all the noise you used to make trying to be enough. But stay with it, because the loneliness of the strong is not the absence of love. It's the clearing before love that is real can find you. It's the wilderness between who you were and who you are becoming. It's the quiet proof that you are no longer willing to be emotionally digested to keep others full. And slowly, that silence turns into clarity. You begin to hear your own voice again. Not the rehearsed one, the true one, the voice that doesn't flinch when you say no. The voice that speaks without over-explaining. The voice that doesn't need to be translated or softened to be valid. That's the beginning of real peace. Not the fragile calm that comes from keeping everyone happy, but the deep, bone-level peace that comes from finally being undivided within yourself. And when that happens, you don't need to yell, you don't need to argue. Your presence speaks for you. Your silence becomes a force field. And those who cannot handle it were never meant to stand at your side for this part of the journey. So now here you are, on the other side of availability, holding a new kind of power. Not the power to dominate, but the power to decide who has access, what gets your energy, where your life force flows. This is sovereignty, and it's sacred. If this spoke to something buried in you, something tired of performing, something ready to choose peace over approval, then write it in the comments. I choose my peace. Let the world know your new boundary has been born. And if you haven't already, subscribe. This channel is for those walking the quiet road home to themselves. You've made it through the rupture, through the silence, through the guilt, through the fire. Now comes the calm, and from here forward, you are no longer available for anything that costs your soul.